Hello and welcome to Ask the Expert. I am Karen McNee from Action Kidney Cancer. We have invited along today Lynn Ho, a Uro-oncology Research Nurse from the Western General Hospital in Edinburgh, to explain and give us an overview of clinical trials. I will now hand over to Lynn, who will provide us with some information and a background on her role. Hello Lynn, and thank you for joining us today. Lovely to see you.
Hi Karen, thanks for inviting me.
So really, Lynn, what I thought would be good to start with is, what is a clinical trial and what are the phases?
Well, a clinical trial is a research study that's been set up and designed to answer a specific research question or questions, and they use scientifically controlled methods. Clinical trials can't be done everywhere, and it's got to be very specifically trained staff to do clinical trials, and not every hospital does them, so it's a case of sourcing where the clinical trials are. And you're right, there's quite a few phases to clinical trials. There's a zero phase, which no patient would ever come across, because that is in the laboratory. That's where it all starts. They start at the bench work. And then you go and there's a phase 1 trial, and that is very small numbers of patients, and that tends to be just looking for a dose of drug and the main toxicities or side effects that a patient would have. But again, very small numbers of patients do phase 1 trials. And then you've got a phase 2 trial, which looks at, again, toxicities, side effects, and the safety of the drug. Again, slightly smaller numbers, but larger numbers than a phase 1 trial. And then you've got a phase 3 trial, which is comparing the drug to standard treatment. And those numbers of patients are much higher. They're quite big recruiting because they need the bigger numbers to show if the drugs are working or not. And that compares to the standard treatment. And then you have phase 4, which you don't often see, because at phase 4, the drug's almost ready to market, go onto the market. So between 3 and 4, sometimes there are drugs that are available, but they have to be through access schemes that the doctor would have to apply for. Okay. So that's the main phases of the trials.
Okay, thank you for that information. Lynn, would it be possible to explain why are new medicines tested? What is the purpose of that?
So obviously new medicines can be tested because they're brand new, they're cut, they want to try them, and that would be your phase 1 trials, where you would be very small numbers of people. Sometimes quite often we do trials where the medicines have all been tried and tested, but we're using them in a slightly different way. So drugs, for instance, that we would maybe give as a 3rd line drug for kidney cancer, we maybe try it as a 1st line drug to see how things are, to see if it works. So we've not long finished a study like that. And it's trying to use the drugs that we have in slightly different ways.
That's great. Thanks for explaining that, Lynn. And Lynn, how do patients hear about clinical trials? How does that start, that whole process start, if you like, for the patient?
Well, you've got a lot of good information, obviously, in the Action Kidney Cancer website as well, has got a part about clinical trials. But if you were in seeing a doctor, you have got the right to ask a doctor, have you got any trials available for me? Most of the medical staff do know about the trials, especially if they're conducting the trials in their hospital. And sometimes it's just a case of asking, is there anything available for me? There is a pathway that we follow for patients when they're identified. If a doctor sees a patient and thinks they would be eligible for a specific trial, they then tell them a bit about the trial, and then if the patient's quite keen, that's where the research nurse comes in and give them a patient information sheet. Now that patient information sheet tells them all about the trial, the drugs that are involved, any side effects, and how long the follow-up would be for. And the patient has to go away and think about it, because it's got to be something that they want to do. They've got to 100% commit to it. It's a big commitment, a clinical trial. So we've got to give them 24 hours to think about it. And if the patient gets back to us and says, yeah, I want to go ahead with a clinical trial, then we would bring them up to the clinic and sign the consent form. Now, signing the consent form for a clinical trial doesn't mean that you're automatically into the clinical trial.
Okay.
What that means is it gives us, as the research staff, it allows us to start what they call screening the patient. And that will mean the protocol that we follow will ask for specific imaging to be done. Maybe they need a CT scan, a bone scan, a brain scan, ECGs, bloods. That allows us to start doing all these procedures. So this is called the screening phase. A screening phase for a trial can last about up to 28 days. So right. You have from the date, the time that you sign the consent form, you have 28 days to get that patient onto the trial.
Right.
And it sounds quite a long time, but actually, if you take away all the weekends that you can't do things, time passes quite quickly. Right. So once you've got everything collated, you've done all the screening process, then that's when we sit down with the consultant of the patient and say, they run through all the eligibility. At the end of the day, they're the ones that say, this patient is good to go through to the trial. They sign the eligibility forms, and then the research nurse can then input the data. Different trials do it slightly different ways, but more often not, you input the data and you can randomise the patient if it's a randomised trial. So there's different types of trials in that. There's randomised trials, there's placebo trials, there's multi-arm trials. So they're all very specific. So if you're getting randomised to a trial, that's telling you if you're getting a drug or not.
Right, right.
And once we've done that part, and then that's you starting on the drug. And we then start getting your treatment sorted, if it's every month, every 6 weeks, however long the treatment's for, and we just keep rolling through that. And our protocol is there for us to follow to safeguard the patient and ourselves. And what we do is we do all the imaging. That will tell us when we should do all the imaging, all the follow-up, bloods, and clinic assessments.
And Lynn, can I just ask at this stage, if a patient is on a clinical trial, are they visiting the hospital potentially more than they would normally?
We try not to. So a lot of the trials we try and at the beginning, I always find that, and I always say to patients at the beginning, the screening part, you're probably in the hospital a bit more. And that's because you've got certain imaging needs to be done, bone scans and CTs. What we try and do is coordinate them. So we try and get the scans done in one day and then maybe come up and see us for bloods the next day. So we would try our best not to have them up and down to the hospital quite as much, but we do kind of say at the beginning, it might be a few more hospital visits just to get this part done.
Right, okay. So then once the patient is on the actual trial, you've explained that you're monitoring them, etc. So what would happen if they had side effects or they didn't want to continue with the trial? Can they withdraw? You know, what are the protocols around that then? Yeah, so clinical trials, and that's the most important thing to remember, clinical trials are completely voluntary. Nobody has to do it. It's just showing you an option that's out there for you.
And if we had a patient who started on a clinical trial and then said, actually, I don't want to do this anymore, then that's absolutely within their rights to withdraw from the trial.
Right.
They don't have to give a reason why. But what we would tend to do, we would tend to ask, can we still follow you up? And that's really to make sure they're safe, because some of the drugs, although they might not have side effects straight away, the side effects might appear later on further down the line. So we would probably always ask if we could still follow them up.
Yeah, and once the trial's completed, is there follow-up thereafter? Because obviously they've then been in this corseted position, presumably. So what is the follow-up once the trial actually finishes, Lynn? So
once the trial, if you are on a trial that the treatment is for, say, 1 year, you will still get followed up in the clinic the way you would normally at certain time points, because clinical trials actually follow up people for 10 to 15 years after. Right. So a clinical trial can go on for a long, long time. And that follow-up might be just a chest abdo-pelvis CT scan, and then they see the consultant the following week with the results of that. So yeah, the follow-up will remain in place. Great, thanks for explaining that. The other thing I wondered was, what benefit, obviously for the patient, what is the benefit of going on the trial? I mean, presumably they're getting access maybe to a medicine that's not yet approved. Would you say that's the main benefit? I think there's a few benefits for clinical trials, and you're right, you've got access to drugs before they come to market, so to speak. You also got quite very close contact with us, because a clinical trial, they want to know everything. They want to know any side effects that you're having from any of the drugs. So we want to know everything, and we do ask patients to phone us with the slightest little thing, just to make sure, so we know they're safe. So some people see that as a good thing. Some people don't like that intrusion so much, but quite often as well, if you're on a clinical trial and you're on maybe a surveillance arm or something, your scans are maybe slightly sooner than they would be on a standard care. Not all the time, but sometimes we do scan them a bit sooner. And is an observational trial different? What is that? I've heard that. So an observational trial is where you are coming in for, you're getting maybe your operation carried out or something, and they want to just see the course of your journey, how you are, maybe check do quality of life questionnaires. We've got an observational one going just now where we're just taking blood tests and urine tests. So we're not actually giving the patient any treatment. It's an observation just to see how they are on their journey. Right, okay, well that's great. This has been a really great overview for patients who may have heard of clinical trials, but they actually don't know very much information. Yeah. So thank you very much. And as you said, on our website, we have a really good section under the research tab, where we've got information about clinical trials. We've got a clinical trial database that shows all the trials available in the UK. And also we've got patients who've shared their experience of being in clinical trials. So what I would say to anyone watching this video, if you would like to get more information after we finish the slide next, we'll give all that detail of how that can be accessed. So thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing with us today and being part of our Ask the Expert series of videos. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.